We have won because New Yorkers have stood up for a city they can afford, a city where they can do more than just struggle. These were Zohran Mamdani's words on the night of his victory, a message that resonated deeply with New Yorkers caught in an existential squeeze. The city had become a paradox of prosperity: record-breaking rents, stagnant wages, rising transit fares, and a growing number of working families one paycheck away from eviction. Mamdani's campaign promised to rewrite that reality. He pledged to freeze rents on stabilized apartments, make city buses free, build 200,000 affordable homes, and open city-run grocery stores. Reforms designed to make New York livable again, not just survivable. To his supporters, it was the blueprint for a fairer city, proof that politics could still serve people instead of property. Progressives hailed him as the face of a new municipal left, a politician unafraid to tax the rich and call inequality by its name. But not everyone shared the optimism. Critics warned that his agenda was financially reckless, legally impractical, and hostile to small landlords and businesses. Some feared that his vision of redistribution would drive away investment and worsen the very housing shortage he vowed to fix. Others saw his rise as evidence that the Democratic Party was drifting too far left for its own coalition. As for the American capitalist spirit, Mamdani's reforms might just land a punch to the gut hard enough to make Adam Smith spill his coffee. But Mamdani's victory reveals more than a change in City Hall. It shows how politically divided the United States is today. Affordable living, paychecks that offer more than mere existence, and public services that come before reckless profit. These are no longer fringe demands but defining questions of modern America. What happens if Mamdani's reforms work? Will the country see an even wider gap between its opposing ideologies, or will that divide begin to narrow? And if the experiment succeeds, will America's future lean toward a new era of socialist policies, leaving behind the founding ideals that once defined its economic and political soul? If you enjoy what you're seeing, like and subscribe, and help the channel grow. Now let's dive into the video. To understand Zohran Mamdani's victory, we must first grasp the conditions the city was facing. New York was caught in a relentless affordability squeeze. Housing costs soared even as supply lagged, leaving renters and homeowners alike struggling to keep up. According to the United Way of New York City, half of working-age households are struggling to cover their basic needs. For everyday New Yorkers, this meant more than numbers. A nurse, a teacher, or a transit worker might find the only affordable apartment hours away from their job, adding exhausting commutes just to keep a roof overhead. Another family might face multiple showings, bidding wars, and broker fees in a market where the average wage could no longer stretch to meet average rent. According to a 2023 report from StreetEasy, New Yorkers earning the city's average annual wage could afford less than 5% of rentals in the market. Families were being priced out of neighborhoods they'd lived in for generations, while younger renters faced rising application fees and stiff competition for even the smallest apartments. Small landlords raised rents as their own expenses climbed. Families were forced to choose between transit fare and groceries. Young professionals abandoned the city they worked in because the rent simply outpaced their paychecks. Housing isn't just expensive, it's increasingly unattainable for the people who keep New York running. Public transit and everyday mobility are another front of struggle for many New Yorkers. Struggling to afford a subway swipe may sound trivial in a city built on trains, but for millions, it's the difference between keeping a job and losing one. According to the Community Service Society of New York, 1 in 5 residents reported difficulty affording transit fares, forcing some to skip medical appointments, limit job searches, or ration their commutes to save money. For workers earning near the city's median income, a monthly MetroCard, now over $130, takes an ever larger share of paychecks that already vanish to rent and groceries. For families, the cost multiplies. 2 working adults commuting daily can spend over $3,000 a year just to get to work. Beyond the turnstiles, the economic strain spreads into daily life. Raising a child in New York has become a near luxury. The average cost of full-time daycare for one infant ranges between $14,000 and $20,000 a year, according to Gothamist and state data. Families with 2 children can easily see childcare eat up 40% of their annual income. Many parents are forced to choose between reducing work hours to cut daycare costs or working longer hours to pay for them, a cycle that often leaves both time and money in short supply. Groceries and utilities, too, have steadily climbed. The New York Times reported that grocery prices in the city rose by nearly 25% between 2021 and 2024, while average energy bills increased faster than the national rate. What used to be a $100 grocery run for a family of 3 now routinely tops $130. even before adding rent and transportation. Various economic studies and nonprofit analyses show just how little financial room most New York families have left. Housing alone consumes over 40% of the average renter's income, according to the New York City Comptroller's Office, while childcare can take another 20 to 30%, depending on a child's age and borough. Add to that the rising costs of groceries, transportation, utilities, and healthcare, and the picture becomes clear. Roughly 85% of a typical household's income goes toward covering only the essentials. What remains, if anything, rarely stretches far enough for savings, emergencies, or even the smallest margin of comfort. Now that we've seen the everyday struggles faced by New Yorkers, it becomes easier to understand why Zohran Mamdani's campaign struck such a powerful chord. His promises of sweeping reform don't just sound ambitious. They speak directly to the frustrations of millions who feel the system no longer works for them. At the heart of Zohran Mamdani's platform lies an ambitious plan to confront New York's housing crisis head-on. His proposal begins with a 4-year freeze on rent-stabilized apartments, halting annual rent increases that have pushed thousands to the brink of eviction. Beyond the freeze, Mamdani pledges to build 200,000 new affordable housing units, prioritizing publicly owned and permanently affordable developments rather than relying solely on private real estate incentives. He also calls for expanding tenant protections, including stronger enforcement against illegal evictions and corporate landlords who warehouse vacant units. His plan would redirect city subsidies away from luxury developers and toward nonprofit and community land trusts, ensuring that affordability isn't temporary but built into ownership structures. Mamdani frames housing as a human right rather than a market commodity, arguing that the city's crisis stems not from scarcity but from policy choices that favor speculation over shelter. In his words, New York's housing system should serve people, not profit. Another cornerstone of Mamdani's platform is his plan to overhaul New York's public transportation system by making it genuinely accessible. His signature proposal, which no doubt gave Uncle Sam a serious fever, is to make city buses completely free, expanding on the MTA's limited pilot program and transforming it into a permanent citywide policy. The goal, he argues, is twofold: to ease the financial strain on working-class commuters and to improve the reliability of one of the most heavily used yet chronically underfunded systems in the country. Mamdani's campaign highlights that for many New Yorkers, a MetroCard is a lifeline to jobs, education, and healthcare. By eliminating fares, he hopes to reduce inequality in mobility, cut traffic congestion, and curb emissions by encouraging more people to rely on public transit. The plan also includes investments to modernize bus infrastructure, expand service in transit deserts, and improve accessibility for seniors and people with disabilities. To fund the initiative, Mamdani proposes reallocating city subsidies and increasing taxes on high-income earners, a move critics say is unrealistic, but which he defends as necessary to build what he calls a transportation system that treats mobility as a public right, not a private burden. Mamdani's vision for New York also extends deeply into family life, focusing on easing the financial strain of raising children in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Central to his plan is the introduction of universal free childcare for children from 6 weeks to 5 years old, a policy aimed at relieving the crushing costs that currently rival college tuition. For working parents, this would mean the ability to remain in the workforce without sacrificing half their income to daycare fees. Mamdani pairs this with a proposal to raise the minimum wage to $30 an hour by 2030, ensuring that families not only survive but have a chance to build stability. On the food front, Mamdani takes an equally unconventional approach. To combat rising grocery prices and food insecurity, he proposes the creation of city-owned grocery stores, one in every borough, designed to sell essential goods at fair, regulated prices. These stores would prioritize sourcing from local farms and cooperatives, cutting out profit-driven middlemen who drive up costs. The initiative also includes expanding funding for community fridges and food cooperatives, particularly in low-income neighborhoods often described as food deserts. Mamdani frames the policy not as government overreach, but as a moral correction, an effort to ensure that access to affordable food isn't dictated by zip code or income bracket. In his words, it's about bringing fairness back to the table, both literally and economically. Taken together, Mamdani's reforms paint a picture of a city trying to reclaim balance, one where the essentials of life are treated as rights, not privileges. His proposals on housing, childcare, transportation, and food are designed to lift the everyday burdens that have made New York unaffordable for the very people who keep it running. Whether it's freezing rents, making buses free, or ensuring no parent has to choose between work and childcare, each policy speaks to a larger vision, a city built around human need rather than the market demand. To his supporters, it's a long overdue correction to decades of inequality. To his critics, a costly experiment. But for millions of New Yorkers squeezed by rising prices and stagnant wages, Mamdani's agenda offers something increasingly rare: the promise of breathing room in a city that never stops tightening its grip. The rise of leaders like Zohran Mamdani signals a broader tremor in American politics, one that shakes the old faith in free market exceptionalism. For decades, the United States has defined itself by a creed of individual responsibility, entrepreneurial ambition, and limited government intervention. Yet, the growing appeal of socialist-leaning policies reveals a shifting national mood: frustration with inequality, fatigue with corporate dominance, and a hunger for security in an economy that feels increasingly unforgiving. If more cities and states begin to pursue similar reforms, America could find itself at a crossroads between its founding ideals and a new collective pragmatism. The country's traditional narrative of self-reliance may start to blur into one of shared provision, forcing a reckoning with what freedom truly means in the 21st century. Whether this ideological drift will renew the nation's sense of purpose or fracture, it further remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: the American spirit, once defined by boundless opportunity, is now being tested by its own promise of fairness. The policies now gaining traction don't just reflect bold ideas, they testify to a system that is quietly failing the working and middle classes. According to the Pew Research Center, the share of U.S. adults in the middle class has fallen from 61% in 1971 to 50% in 2021, while income gains overwhelmingly accrue to the upper tier. The authors of an OECD working paper argue that high childcare costs, stagnant wages, and shrinking job security form a hollowing out of the middle class. This environment creates fertile ground for reformers who promise redistribution, stronger public services, and a more equitable safety net. For America to preserve its founding ideals of self-reliance, market freedom, and opportunity, while also delivering for its hardworking citizens, it will need a new compact. That might mean raising wages, protecting collective bargaining, and rethinking how public goods are financed. If it fails, the drift toward alternatives, models defined by stronger social policies and tighter constraints on market forces, could widen the ideological gulf and reshape the country's spirit far more dramatically than any single election ever could. Zohran Mamdani's victory in New York is more than a local political upset. It's a reflection of a nation questioning its own identity. His promises of affordable living, fair wages, and public welfare speak to a growing unease in a country where the cost of survival has outpaced the reward for hard work. Whether his reforms prove practical or not, their resonance reveals how deeply the American middle and working classes are yearning for relief. For some, Mamdani represents hope, proof that politics can still answer to ordinary people. For others, he is a warning sign of a country drifting from its founding faith in free enterprise and personal responsibility. But regardless of which side of that divide one stands on, his rise underscores a truth that can no longer be ignored. The American experiment is evolving, and its future will depend on whether it can reconcile prosperity with fairness, ambition with compassion, and freedom with the shared responsibility of keeping the dream alive. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more stories that shape our world. I'll see you in the next video.